Chapter 1. The Descent into Doubt. The air in the Grand Canyon was a paradox, crisp and clean, yet heavy with the dust of ages and an unspoken silence that pressed in on Dr. Sarah Chun. She had chosen this assignment, this desolate, magnificent chasm, not for its geological wonders, but for its isolation. 5 years had passed since her brother's suicide, a tragedy that had carved a canyon of guilt and grief within her, far deeper than any natural formation. The suffocating memories, the phantom scent of antiseptic and despair, still clung to her like a shroud in the confines of her city apartment. Here, amidst the vast, indifferent expanse of rock and sky, she hoped to find a different kind of silence, one that might finally quiet the echoes of her past. Her official reason for being here was clinical. A forensic psychologist brought in by the National Park Service to consult on a baffling series of disappearances and deaths. The official reports were tidy, citing accidental falls, heat stroke, or unfortunate encounters with wildlife. But the hushed tones of the park rangers, the way their eyes darted towards the deeper, shadowed crevices, told a different story. They spoke of a presence, an ancient malevolence, a spirit that claimed lives. Sarah, a woman whose life was built on logic and empirical evidence, dismissed these whispers as the desperate coping mechanisms of minds grappling with the inexplicable. Superstition was a comfort, a narrative balm for the raw wound of tragedy. She understood that, intellectually, emotionally, she felt nothing but a detached curiosity. Her initial days were a meticulous, almost ritualistic immersion into the data. She examined accident sites with the precision of a surgeon, her gaze sweeping over the treacherous ledges and crumbling paths, searching for logical inconsistencies. She interviewed witnesses, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and unspoken terror, analyzing their micro-expressions, their vocal inflections, searching for the telltale signs of trauma, not supernatural encounter. She delved into the psychological profiles of the victims, looking for patterns of risk-taking behavior, underlying mental health issues, anything that could explain their demise without resorting to the fantastical. Each step was a deliberate act of scientific detachment, a shield against the emotional chaos that threatened to engulf her. Yet, the canyon began its subtle assault. It started with a faint, melancholic humming, a sound like a distant, mournful lullaby carried on the wind, even when the air was still and no one else was present. Sarah would pause, her analytical mind scrambling for a source. A loose wire, a trick of the wind, a distant tourist. But the sound would vanish as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the profound silence of the canyon. Then came the fleeting shadows, quick as a blink, at the periphery of her vision. A dark shape against the ochre rock, a flicker in the corner of her eye, gone before she could fully turn her head. Her fatigued mind, a consequence of restless nights plagued by her own recurring nightmares, easily rationalized these as optical illusions, the result of exhaustion and the intense desert light. The inexplicable chill that permeated even the warmest parts of the canyon, a sudden drop in temperature that raised goosebumps on her arms, was attributed to the canyon's unique microclimates, the way the vast rock formations absorbed and released heat. Every unsettling occurrence was met with a scientific explanation, a desperate attempt to maintain her grip on reality. Her first formal meeting with Dr. James Morrison, her former mentor and the head of the NPS psychological evaluation team, was a carefully choreographed dance of professional cordiality. Morrison, a man whose reputation was built on his unwavering adherence to scientific rigor, observed her with an almost clinical detachment. Beneath his polite inquiries about her journey and her initial findings, Sarah detected a subtle undercurrent of professional tension. He subtly questioned her capacity to handle such a high-profile case, given her past, a veiled reference to her leave of absence after her brother's death. "Are you certain you're ready for this, Sarah?" he'd asked, his voice laced with a concern that felt more like judgment. "This environment can be taxing, especially for those with a history of sensitivity." His words, though seemingly innocuous, reinforced her deepest fears about her own mental fragility, planting insidious seeds of doubt about her perceptions. The Grand Canyon itself, with its immense scale and ancient silence, was no longer just a backdrop. It was an active participant, its oppressive atmosphere slowly, inexorably, chipping away at Sarah's carefully constructed composure. The vast emptiness mirrored her internal isolation, and the ancient geological layers seemed to whisper of buried secrets, waiting to be unearthed, secrets that threatened to shatter her fragile peace and drag her deeper into the abyss of her own mind. Chapter 2. Whispers from the Walls. The subtle anomalies that had pricked at Sarah's scientific composure in Chapter 1 now escalated into an undeniable, chilling symphony of the paranormal. The melancholic humming, once easily dismissed as wind, now resonated with a distinct, sorrowful melody, a lament that seemed to follow her, echoing from the very walls of her rented cabin. It was a sound that burrowed into her subconscious, twisting her dreams into vivid, disturbing nightmares. In these nocturnal terrors, the weeping woman from her outline, Maria, materialized with terrifying clarity. Her face, a mask of anguish, was contorted in silent screams, her hands reaching out, not in aggression, but in a desperate plea. Sarah would wake in a cold sweat, the phantom touch of Maria's icy fingers lingering on her skin, as Spanish words Maria had cried out in her dreams. "Ay, a dame, la verdad," ringing in her ears. During her solitary hikes, the canyon, once a place of detached observation, transformed into an active participant in her torment. Disembodied whispers, faint at first, grew bolder, seemingly responding to her unspoken thoughts, her internal debates about the disappearances. They were not coherent words, but a cacophony of sighs, gasps, and the rustling of unseen garments, always just beyond the reach of her conscious understanding. The vastness of the canyon, which she had hoped would offer solace, now amplified her isolation, making her feel like a solitary figure in a cosmic echo chamber. The chills she had attributed to microclimates now clung to her like a shroud, an unnatural cold that permeated her bones, even under the scorching desert sun. It was the cold of a tomb, a constant reminder of the unseen presence. Back in her cabin, the poltergeist activity began. A book would slide off a shelf with a soft thud when no one was near. Her coffee mug, left on the counter, would be found shattered on the floor. The most unsettling occurrences involved her personal belongings. She'd find her neatly folded clothes disarranged, her toothbrush moved, and most disturbingly, strange archaic symbols etched into the fine layer of dust that perpetually settled on her laptop screen and the surface of her bedside table. These symbols, reminiscent of ancient petroglyphs, seemed to shift and change, hinting at a language she couldn't comprehend, yet felt intrinsically tied to the canyon's deep history. Each escalating event chipped away at Sarah's carefully constructed scientific facade. The psychological toll was immense. Her sleep deprivation, already a chronic issue, worsened dramatically. And nightmares bled into her waking hours, manifesting as fleeting hallucinations. A glimpse of Maria's shadow darting across a sun-drenched rock face, the faint scent of old blood, and fear in the air. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, her heart pounding with an irrational paranoia. The logical explanations she had clung to began to fray, replaced by a terrifying question. Was she losing her mind? The fear of a relapse into the dissociative episodes that had plagued her after her brother's death became a suffocating weight. She remembered the blank spaces in her memory, the moments when reality had fractured, and a cold dread settled in her stomach. Was this the beginning of another descent? Dr. Morrison, ever the astute observer, noticed her deteriorating state. His concern, however, felt less like empathy and more like a subtle reinforcement of her self-doubt. Perhaps a short leave of absence, Sarah? He suggested, his voice smooth, almost paternal. You've been working tirelessly. The canyon can be overwhelming. A fresh perspective might do you good. His words, while seemingly supportive, subtly undermined her credibility, suggesting her findings were a product of fatigue, not fact. He was subtly pushing her towards the very conclusion she feared, that she was mentally unstable. Thomas Whitehorse, however, offered a different kind of warning. His eyes, ancient and knowing, held a deep sorrow as he spoke of disturbing the canyon's ancient spirits, of the delicate balance between the living and the dead. The land remembers, Dr. Chun, he'd said, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. And sometimes the memories demand to be heard. Sarah, still clinging to her scientific skepticism, dismissed his words as folklore, a cultural narrative for the unexplainable. Yet the unsettling events continued, relentless, pushing her to the very brink of her rational mind. She began to secretly record the phenomena with her phone, desperate for objective proof. But the recordings yielded only static, punctuated by distorted, guttural sounds that sent shivers down her spine. Sounds that seemed to be trying to form words, but failing. The chapter culminates in a chilling discovery. One evening, after a particularly harrowing day of inexplicable occurrences, Sarah returned to her cabin. On her bedside table, tucked beneath a stack of research papers, was an old, faded photograph. It depicted a young woman, her face strikingly similar to the one in Sarah's dreams, her eyes wide with a sorrow that mirrored Maria's. The photograph was sepia-toned, clearly from an earlier era, and it was tucked into a small, ornate silver frame that Sarah had never seen before. It shouldn't have been there, It was a physical impossibility, a tangible breach of her reality, a direct challenge to her sanity. As she stared at the image, a faint, sweet scent of jasmine, a scent she had never encountered in the arid canyon, filled the air, and a single cold tear traced a path down her cheek, a tear that was not her own. Chapter 3. Echoes of a Forgotten Past. The photograph had shattered something fundamental in Sarah's carefully constructed worldview. She sat in her cabin as dawn broke over the canyon, the sepia-toned image trembling in her hands, the woman's sorrowful eyes seeming to follow her every movement. The scent of jasmine had faded with the night, but its memory lingered like a ghost itself, a sensory anchor to an impossible reality. Sleep had been elusive, punctuated by fragments of dreams where the woman in the photograph spoke in urgent Spanish, her words dissolving into static the moment Sarah tried to grasp their meaning. The rational part of her mind, the part trained in forensic psychology and empirical analysis, screamed that this was a breakdown, a manifestation of her own unresolved trauma projected onto her environment. But the photograph was real, tangible, undeniably present in a way that hallucinations were not. The shift from purely psychological analysis to historical research was not a conscious decision, but rather a desperate grasp for sanity. If she could find a logical explanation for the photograph, for the woman's face that haunted her dreams, perhaps she could reclaim her grip on reality. The Grand Canyon's visitor center housed a modest archive, dusty boxes filled with yellowed newspaper clippings, faded photographs, and bureaucratic documents that chronicled the canyon's human history. Sarah approached the elderly archivist, Mrs. Elena Vasquez, with the photograph clutched in her sweating palm. "I found this in my cabin," Sarah lied smoothly, her professional training in deception detection serving her well in reverse. "I was wondering if you might know anything about it. The woman looks familiar somehow." Mrs. Vasquez adjusted her thick glasses and studied, the image with the intensity of a scholar examining an ancient manuscript. Her weathered face, lined with decades of desert sun, creased into a frown of recognition. "Ay, Dios mío," she whispered, crossing herself. "This looks like Maria Delgado. Poor girl. She disappeared back in the 20s during all that construction work. Such a tragedy." Sarah's heart pounded as Mrs. Vasquez led her to a filing cabinet, her arthritic fingers dancing over manila folders with practiced efficiency. "Here," she said, producing a newspaper clipping from 1924. The headline read, "Local Woman Missing, Presumed Dead in Canyon Fall." The accompanying photograph, though grainy and poorly reproduced, was unmistakably the same woman. Sarah devoured every scrap of information Mrs. Vasquez could provide. Fragmented accounts of Maria Delgado, a young Mexican-American woman who worked as a laundress for the construction crews building a new road into the canyon. The official story was an accidental fall, a tragic misstep on treacherous terrain. But beneath the official narrative, Sarah found whispers, rumors of foul play, of a government cover-up, of Maria having seen something she shouldn't have. These whispers, dismissed as local gossip or the fanciful imaginings of a grieving community, resonated with Sarah. Maria, like Sarah, was an outsider, a keen observer. Maria, like Sarah, had stumbled upon something hidden, something dangerous. The parallels were chilling, too precise to be mere coincidence. As Sarah delved deeper into Maria's story, the ghost's manifestations became more targeted, almost as if Maria herself was guiding her. A sudden, inexplicable gust of wind would direct Sarah's gaze to an old, overgrown trail, not marked on any modern map. Following it, she'd discover the crumbling remains of an old mining camp, long abandoned, its rusted tools and collapsed shacks whispering of forgotten labor and desperate lives. Here, the sensory experiences were overwhelming. A sudden, acrid smell of old dust and fear would fill her nostrils, so potent it made her gag. Fleeting flashes of movement in her peripheral vision would resolve into spectral figures, men in old work clothes, their faces gaunt and desperate, toiling in the oppressive heat. She'd feel the chilling sensation of being watched, a prickling on the back of her neck that was more than just paranoia. These were not random hauntings. They were echoes of Maria's past, fragments of her life and her terror, imprinted on the very landscape. Her psychological state, already precarious, became increasingly fragile. The line between reality and illusion blurred with alarming frequency. She'd find herself speaking aloud to Maria, asking questions, pleading for answers, only to realize she was alone, her voice swallowed by the vast silence of the canyon. Her conversations with Dr. Morrison became more strained, more adversarial. He dismissed her historical findings as a distraction, a symptom of her growing obsession. Sarah, we're dealing with facts, not folklore, he'd say, his voice laced with a condescending patience that grated on her nerves. This Maria Delgado is a tragic footnote, nothing more. Focus on the psychological profiles, the environmental factors. You're losing your objectivity. He subtly undermined her credibility to other park officials, painting her as emotionally compromised, a psychologist who was herself in need of psychological evaluation. His words, intended to control and dismiss, only fueled Sarah's resolve. She knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that Maria was real, and that her story held the key to the canyon's dark secrets. The chapter culminated in a desperate, late-night hike, guided by a series of increasingly vivid dreams and the insistent, almost physical pull of Maria's presence. Sarah found herself at the mouth of a secluded cave, hidden behind a curtain of overgrown brush. The air inside was heavy, ancient, and thick, with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and acrid. Deep within the cave, nestled amongst ancient rock formations, she found it, a small, leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age, its cover adorned with a faded, hand-painted image of a weeping woman. As she carefully opened it, the first few lines, written in a delicate, looping script, confirmed her deepest fears. Maria Delgado's journal. Its brittle pages hinted at a dark secret, not just of illegal activities, but of a powerful, shadowy organization operating within the canyon, a secret that had cost Maria her life and now threatened to claim Sarah's sanity. Chapter 4. The Unveiling of Truth. The brittle pages of Maria's journal, discovered in the secluded cave, became Sarah's new obsession. Back in her cabin, under the harsh glare of her desk lamp, she meticulously deciphered the looping script, each word a fragile whisper from the past. The entries, written in a mixture of Spanish and broken English, painted a horrifying picture. Maria, a keen observer, had stumbled upon the clandestine government operation, witnessing the illegal dumping of toxic waste on sacred Hopi land. Her journal detailed her growing fear, her attempts to gather evidence, and finally, her desperate realization that she was being watched, that her life was in danger. The final entries were frantic, detailing a confrontation, a struggle, and then nothing. The truth was stark, brutal, and undeniable. Maria Delgado was not a victim of an accidental fall, but a murder victim, silenced to protect a monstrous secret. This revelation didn't just shift Sarah's understanding of the Grand Canyon's ghost. It fundamentally altered her perception of the world. Maria was not a vengeful spirit, but a victim seeking justice, a voice from the grave demanding to be heard. The paranormal activity, which had previously been terrifying and disorienting, now felt different. The whispers from the walls were no longer just unsettling sounds. They were fragmented pleas, guiding her, urging her forward. The fleeting shadows seemed to point the way, and the inexplicable chills now felt like Maria's mournful presence, a cold hand on her back, pushing her towards the truth. Sarah found herself following these spectral cues, her scientific skepticism replaced by a desperate need to help Maria find peace. Armed with the journal and her newfound conviction, Sarah sought out Dr. Morrison, expecting his support, his scientific mind to grasp the gravity of her discovery. She laid out the journal, detailing its contents, the historical context, the undeniable evidence of a cover-up. His reaction, however, was not the validation she craved, but a chilling, almost hostile dismissal. "Sarah, this is a fabrication," he stated, his voice tight with a controlled anger she hadn't seen before. "A product of your deteriorating mental state. You're projecting your own trauma onto this folklore." He subtly, but firmly, suggested that her obsession with Maria's journal was a sign of a complete breakdown, a desperate attempt to find meaning in chaos. His eyes, usually so calm and analytical, held a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps, or something darker. His reaction raised a red flag, a blaring siren in Sarah's mind. Was he truly blind to the evidence? Or was there something more sinister at play? Desperate for someone to believe her, Sarah turned to Thomas Whitehorse. She presented him with Maria's journal, the faded photograph, and her own chilling conclusions. Thomas, his face etched with ancient sorrow, confirmed her findings. He spoke of the clandestine operation, of the desecration of the sacred Hopi land, of his ancestors' warnings about a great imbalance that would befall the canyon if the land was disturbed. "Maria's spirit is not malevolent, Dr. Chun," he explained, his voice a low, resonant hum. "She is trapped, unable to rest until the truth is fully exposed and the land healed. She seeks not revenge, but resolution." His words, steeped in generations of wisdom, resonated deeply with Sarah, confirming her intuitive understanding of Maria's plight. Guided by Maria's increasingly insistent presence and the cryptic clues within the journal, Sarah discovered a hidden entrance to an abandoned underground facility deep within the canyon. It was a place not marked on any map, a scar on the ancient landscape, concealed by a cleverly disguised rock formation. The air grew heavy with a palpable sense of dread as she approached. As she stepped across the threshold, a powerful surge of psychic energy overwhelmed her, a force that felt like 1,000 voices screaming in unison. The world spun, and she was no longer in the present. She was Maria, reliving her final moments. The stench of fear, the metallic tongue of blood, the desperate struggle, the faces of her killers, all flooded Sarah's senses in a vivid shared hallucination. It was a terrifying, visceral experience that blurred the lines between Sarah's reality and Maria's past, leaving Sarah physically and psychologically shaken, but with an undeniable, unshakable conviction of the horrifying truth. Maria's murder was real, the cover-up was real, and Sarah was now inextricably linked to it all. Chapter 5. The Labyrinth of Lies. The shared hallucination of Maria's death had left Sarah profoundly shaken. The visceral terror of Maria's final moments imprinted on her psyche. The lines between her own trauma and Maria's had blurred, creating a disorienting echo chamber in her mind. Yet, amidst the lingering horror, a fierce resolve had solidified within her. She was no longer just an investigator. She was an avenger, driven by Maria's silent plea for justice. The abandoned underground facility, a place that felt both ancient and disturbingly modern, beckoned. Its entrance, a gaping maw in the canyon wall, seemed to breathe a cold, metallic air, a stark contrast to the sun-drenched expanse outside. Inside, the darkness was absolute, broken only by the beam of Sarah's headlamp, which danced across rough-hewn rock and corroded metal. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, decay, and something else, a faint, acrid chemical odor that made her stomach churn. This was no natural cave. It was a man-made scar on the earth, a testament to human greed and deception. As she ventured deeper, the ghost of Maria became more physically manifest, not as a terrifying specter, but as a mournful presence, a shimmering outline in the periphery of her vision, a cold breath on her neck, a faint, sorrowful hum that resonated deep within her bones. Maria was guiding her, leading her through the labyrinthine corridors, a silent, desperate companion in the oppressive gloom. Sarah uncovered more evidence of the illegal dumping and the government cover-up. Old blueprints, brittle with age, detailed the facility's complex layout, revealing hidden chambers and ventilation shafts that led to the canyon floor. Classified documents, their once secret contents now exposed to the harsh light of truth, listed names, dates, and the chilling details of the operation. Chilling photographs, faded but still potent, depicted barrels of toxic waste being offloaded into the canyon. The faces of the men involved grim and determined. And then, the most disturbing discovery. A series of medical reports detailing the mysterious illnesses and deaths of local wildlife, and more disturbingly, the canyon's indigenous population, all dismissed as natural occurrences. The sheer scale of the deception, The callous disregard for life and land sickened her. As she delved deeper into the facility's secrets, the psychological horror intensified. Maria's presence became more intimate, more invasive. Sometimes, the ghost would appear as a younger version of Sarah herself, a manifestation of her own guilt and repressed memories. This personal connection to the ghost forced Sarah to confront her own past, the suicide of her brother, the feeling of helplessness that had paralyzed her, the guilt of not being able to save him. Maria's silent suffering mirrored her own, creating a terrifying yet strangely comforting bond. The facility became a crucible, forcing Sarah to face not only the external horrors of the past, but also the internal demons that had haunted her for years. Meanwhile, Dr. Morrison, increasingly desperate to stop Sarah, began to actively sabotage her investigation. He spread rumors about her mental instability among the park staff, subtly twisting her findings into evidence of her deteriorating sanity. He tampered with her equipment, deleting files from her laptop, corrupting her research data. He even attempted to have her forcibly removed from the case, claiming she was a danger to herself and others, citing her past dissociative episodes as proof of her unreliability. Sarah realized the full extent of his betrayal, the calculated cruelty of his actions. The psychological impact of this revelation, the loss of a trusted mentor, the shattering of her belief in authority figures, was almost as devastating as the supernatural encounters. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound, leaving her feeling utterly alone and vulnerable. Thomas Whitehorse, sensing the escalating danger, appeared at her cabin one evening, his face grim. He presented her with ancient Hopi protective charms, intricately woven with feathers and beads, and offered guidance, emphasizing the importance of truth and healing for both the living and the dead. "The canyon demands balance, Dr. Chun," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The truth must be spoken, and the land must be healed." His words, though cryptic, offered a glimmer of hope in the encroaching darkness. He also warned her of Morrison's true nature, revealing that his family had been involved in the cover-up for generations, a secret passed down through bloodlines. The chapter ends with Sarah discovering a hidden chamber within the facility, a place not marked on any blueprint. The air here was even colder, heavier, charged with a palpable sense of despair. Inside, she found not only the skeletal remains of Maria Delgado, her bones intertwined with the roots of ancient desert plants, but also a shocking personal connection to the cover-up, a faded photograph tucked into Maria's skeletal hand. It was a picture of her own grandfather, a high-ranking government official, standing alongside the very men responsible for Maria's death, their faces smiling, oblivious to the horror they had wrought. The image was a punch to the gut, a betrayal that echoed through generations, linking Sarah directly to the very evil she was fighting. The ghost of Maria, now a shimmering, almost solid form, stood beside her, her silent gaze fixed on the photograph, a profound sorrow radiating from her spectral form. The truth, finally unveiled, was far more personal and far more terrifying than Sarah could have ever imagined. Chapter 6: The Ancestral Shadow. The faded photograph, clutched in Sarah's trembling hand, was a betrayal that echoed through generations. Her grandfather, a man she had revered, a pillar of integrity in her childhood memories, stood smiling alongside the very men responsible for Maria's murder and the subsequent cover-up. The discovery shattered her perception of her family, her lineage, and ultimately, her own identity. A profound sense of inherited guilt washed over her, a sickening realization that the darkness she was fighting was not just external, but woven into the very fabric of her being. She grappled with the weight of this legacy, questioning everything she thought she knew about herself. Was the trauma she carried, the fragility of her own mind, somehow a consequence of this ancestral sin? This personal connection to the tragedy intensified Maria's presence. The ghost, no longer a distant, mournful guide, now seemed to directly interact with Sarah's internal conflict. Fragmented memories, not her own, but Maria's, flashed before her eyes. Glimpses of her grandfather's face, younger, harder, giving orders, his voice echoing in her mind, confessing his complicity. The horror became deeply personal, a chilling dance between the living and the dead, where the past reached out to claim the present. Sarah realized Maria wasn't just seeking justice for herself. She was seeking truth, a reckoning for all those connected to the perpetrators, a cleansing of the generational stain. Dr. Morrison, now fully exposed as an antagonist, materialized in the hidden chamber, his face a mask of grim determination. The air crackled with tension, a silent battle of wills. He had followed her, his desperation palpable. "You shouldn't have come here, Sarah," he said, his voice low and menacing, devoid of the paternal warmth she had once trusted. He revealed that his family, too, had a long-standing connection to the cover-up, a dark secret passed down through his own lineage. He had been tasked with protecting it at all costs, a duty he had embraced with a chilling zeal. His eyes, once so analytical, now burned with a fanaticism that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. He lunged for the evidence Sarah had collected: Maria's journal, the classified documents, the damning photographs, intent on destroying it all. A tense, psychologically charged cat-and-mouse game ensued within the dark, claustrophobic confines of the underground complex. The facility, once a place of discovery, became a terrifying maze. Morrison, driven by fear and a twisted sense of loyalty to his family's legacy, was relentless. He tried to manipulate Sarah's fragile mental state, exploiting her survivor's guilt, twisting her pursuit of truth into a manifestation of her own unresolved trauma. "You're just looking for someone to blame, Sarah," he sneered, his words designed to unravel her. "Your brother's death, your own failures. This is just a delusion." He threatened to expose her past mental health struggles, to discredit her entirely, effectively trapping her in the canyon, both physically and psychologically. The stakes were raised dramatically. Sarah was no longer just investigating a ghost. She was fighting to clear Maria's name, expose a generational conspiracy, and reclaim her own sanity and reputation. Just as Morrison cornered Sarah in a narrow passage, his hand reaching for her throat, a sudden guttural cry echoed through the facility. Thomas Whitehorse, sensing Sarah's dire situation, had arrived. He had followed her, guided by his ancestral knowledge of the canyon's hidden paths and the growing spiritual unrest. He didn't engage Morrison directly, but instead, with a swift, almost imperceptible movement, he threw a small, intricately carved wooden fetish, filled with dried herbs, into a nearby ventilation shaft. A thick, acrid smoke billowed out, disorienting Morrison and creating a momentary diversion. The ancient Hopi rituals, once dismissed by Sarah as folklore, were now her only hope. The chapter ends with Sarah, momentarily free, but trapped deeper within the facility, the smoke stinging her eyes, the sound of Morrison's enraged shouts echoing behind her, and Maria's spectral presence growing stronger, urging her to fight for the truth, to not let their shared past be buried again. Chapter 7. The Reckoning and Release. Trapped and cornered by Morrison, in the suffocating darkness of the underground facility, Sarah faced her ultimate psychological and physical test. The acrid smoke from Thomas's diversion still hung heavy in the air, mingling with the metallic tang of fear and the faint, sweet scent of jasmine that now always accompanied Maria's presence. Morrison, his face contorted by a desperate rage, lunged at her, his eyes burning with a chilling fanaticism. But before he could reach her, the ghost of Maria Delgado, now fully manifested, became a powerful, almost tangible force. She didn't attack Morrison directly. Instead, she amplified Sarah's own inner turmoil, projecting the raw, unadulterated pain of her murder and the subsequent cover-up into the claustrophobic space. The air grew heavy, thick with a psychic pressure that threatened to crush Sarah, forcing her to relive not only Maria's death, but also the traumatic moments leading to her brother's suicide. The climax was a terrifying fusion of psychological breakdown and supernatural confrontation. Sarah, pushed to her absolute limit, experienced a profound dissociative episode. The lines between her reality, Maria's past, and her own repressed memories completely dissolved. She saw her brother's face superimposed on Maria's, his silent accusation mirroring Maria's desperate plea. Her grandfather's face, once a symbol of integrity, now morphed into Morrison's, forcing her to confront the deep-seated guilt and helplessness that had haunted her for years. Her body convulsed, a physical manifestation of the psychic energy coursing through her. Blood trickled from her nose, her vision blurred, and a searing pain shot through her temples. She was Maria. She was her brother. She was herself, all at once, drowning in a maelstrom of past and present trauma. Morrison, witnessing Sarah's apparent mental collapse and the terrifying spectral activity, began to crack under the pressure. The ghost's influence, combined with Sarah's raw emotional outpouring, exposed his own fears and the crushing weight of his family's complicity. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide with terror, muttering incoherently about curses and ancestral sins. He tried to escape, scrambling through the dark corridors, but the canyon itself seemed to conspire against him. Rocks shifted, passages narrowed, and disorienting echoes of Maria's cries bounced off the walls, driving him deeper into the labyrinth. He was trapped, not just by the physical confines of the facility, but by the psychological torment unleashed by Maria's spirit. Just as Sarah felt herself slipping into the abyss, a strong, grounding hand gripped her arm. Thomas Whitehorse reappeared, his presence a beacon of calm amidst the chaos. He didn't fight Morrison. His purpose was to guide Sarah through her psychological crisis. He began to chant in a low, rhythmic voice, performing an ancient Hopi ritual, a cleansing and truth-telling ceremony. The air around Sarah began to clear, the psychic pressure easing. Thomas's words, steeped in generations of wisdom, helped Sarah to ground herself, to understand that Maria's spirit was not seeking revenge, but release through truth. He explained that Maria's torment was a reflection of the land's torment, and only by exposing the truth could both find peace. In a moment of profound clarity, guided by Maria's spectral hand, which now felt warm and comforting, Sarah exposed the final piece of evidence. In a hidden compartment, concealed behind a loose stone in the wall, she found a brittle, yellowed confession from her grandfather, detailing the entire conspiracy and his profound remorse. This act of truth-telling, witnessed by Morrison, who had stumbled back into the chamber, and amplified by Maria's now radiant presence, created a powerful psychic resonance that shattered the remaining illusions. Maria's spirit, finally at peace, dissipated into a shimmering mist, leaving behind a profound sense of calm and a lingering scent of desert rain. Morrison, left broken and exposed, collapsed to the ground, his carefully constructed lies crumbling around him, his mind reeling from the confrontation with his family's dark legacy. Sarah, though physically and emotionally drained, experienced a breakthrough. She had not only helped Maria find peace, but had also begun the arduous process of healing her own deep wounds, accepting her past and embracing her newfound strength. Chapter 8: Echoes and New Beginnings. In the aftermath of the confrontation, a profound stillness settled over the Grand Canyon, a quiet breath of relief after the storm. The oppressive atmosphere that had clung to the ancient rocks like a shroud began to lift, replaced by a clear, almost reverent calm. The air, once heavy with the scent of fear and decay, now carried the faint, clean aroma of desert rain, a promise of renewal. The psychic resonance of Maria's release lingered, a gentle hum that resonated with the very core of Sarah's being. Dr. Morrison, broken and exposed, was apprehended by authorities. His confession and the damning evidence Sarah had uncovered leading to a full-scale investigation into the historical cover-up. The National Park Service, now fully aware of the truth, began the arduous process of acknowledging the past wrongs and working in collaboration with the Hopi tribe to heal the desecrated land. It was a long road, but a necessary one, a testament to the power of truth and reconciliation. Sarah, though physically exhausted and emotionally drained, felt a profound sense of liberation. The ghost of Maria Delgado was gone, her spirit finally at peace, but her presence lingered within Sarah, not as a haunting, but as a quiet strength, a guiding light. The experience had irrevocably changed her. She no longer feared her own mind. Instead, she understood its complexities and vulnerabilities as strengths, as pathways to deeper understanding. Her dissociative episodes, once a terrifying descent into chaos, had ceased, replaced by a newfound clarity and an acceptance of her past trauma. She made peace with her brother's memory, understanding with a painful clarity that she couldn't have saved him, just as Maria couldn't have saved herself from her murderers. The guilt, once a suffocating weight, transformed into a quiet sorrow, a reminder of the preciousness of life and the fragility of the human spirit. Thomas Whitehorse, his wisdom now fully revealed, became a trusted friend and confidant. Together, they worked to ensure the truth of Maria's story was preserved and taught, not as a tale of horror, but as a cautionary legend, a testament to the enduring power of justice and the sacredness of the land. He taught Sarah about the interconnectedness of all things, the delicate balance that must be maintained between humanity and nature, between the living and the dead. Sarah decided to stay in the Grand Canyon for a time, not as an investigator, but as a volunteer, dedicating herself to the land's restoration and working closely with the Hopi community. She began to write, not academic papers filled with clinical jargon, but a personal account of her experiences, a raw and honest narrative of her journey into the heart of darkness and back. It was a way to process her own healing, to honor Maria's memory, and to share the profound lessons she had learned. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the canyon walls in hues of fiery orange and deep purple, Sarah stood at the edge, gazing into the vast expanse. She no longer saw it as a place of fear and despair, but as a testament to resilience, truth, and the enduring power of the human spirit, even in the face of the supernatural. The psychological scars remained, etched into her soul like the ancient layers of the canyon itself, but they were no longer open wounds. They were reminders of her strength, her courage, and the profound connection she had forged with the ghost of the Grand Canyon. The horror was over, but the echoes of truth and the promise of new beginnings resonated through the silent, ancient heart of the canyon.